Alright, announced this morning, Splatoon 2 will be receiving a 1.2 patch later today, at the time of recording this obviously. So, much like I did with the first game, I'm actually going to make a video going over the changes that we'll be seeing in the update. Now there was another patch not too long ago, however all it did was change the special requirement for a few weapons, so it didn't really warrant a video. However, the changes in this patch are a bit more drastic, so let's go over some of the changes, and I'll talk about some of it in depth, and give my thoughts on some of it, at least for the things I do know, like if there's a change to the weapon that I've played, or if I know something about why things may have been changed, then I'll give some insight into that. But first off, let's start with some main weapon adjustments. First off, the mobility of the Sploosh-O-Matic while firing has been increased by 11%. This doesn't really seem too much, but the whole point of the Sploosh is how mobile it can be, and in the first game it had a pretty high mobility. I haven't really played it in this game, so I don't know if its base mobility had been adjusted at all, so I can't say whether or not this was to make up for, a difference between the games, or if this is just something they felt they needed to give the weapon, as I know another class of weapons that had its mobility significantly changed, and does come up here, was kind of an annoying change from the first game. But I don't know too much about the Sploosh, but if this is, going back to how Splatoon 1 functioned with the Sploosh, then I could see this being a good thing. But for now, I guess that's pretty cool to see the change. The weapon itself, I haven't really been seeing too much, mostly because its kit. It shares the kit with the original Splat Roller, and the Splat Roller has more range than the Sploosh, giving it an overall better chance when it comes to higher play. The higher you go, the more likely people are to favor kill times and range and yada yada yada. So this change of the Sploosh mobility while shooting increased by 11%. Next up, the Luna had its deviation when shooting from the air lowered by 17%. If you don't know, in Splatoon, you have your normal accuracy, which is when you're standing still and firing, and then when you jump and fire, your accuracy goes down. It's often called deviation. It's more noticeable with weapons that have already pretty bad accuracy, like the 96. If you're going to jump, you're going to see a lot of deviation in the shots. Now with the Splatoon 2, they added a lot of deviation to blasters when they would jump and fire. This was to make it, I guess, to punish people that were playing Dolphin, essentially. If you would jump and fire, and that's all blasters did in the first game, was just jump out of the ink and fire. So they added deviation to the blasts in Splatoon 2, and it seems like they've already gone and backpedaled a bit on the Luna. The Luna had a bit of deviation in the first game, however, because it was so short-ranged, it wasn't very noticeable. But in this, they gave it a noticeable amount of deviation, and it seems like they're already going back on that. Now it's being reduced by 17%. And I can't really say for sure how big of a change that is, because I haven't played the Luna. And then it also has a faster fire rate when going from in the air. So if you're going to fire from the air, it has a slightly faster fire rate, and is going to have shots come out earlier while in mid-air. This same adjustment to the fire rate while in air does apply to the normal blaster as well. This next one, the Clash Blaster. This is a weapon I actually have found to be really fun to play, and I definitely enjoy this a lot more than any other blaster in the game, but I had two problems with the weapon before. It's the fact that it was very inconsistent when it came to turfing, and the fact that it got the same sort of treatment when it came to its ink consumption that all the blasters got, and that they tried to make sure you could get the least out of the tank as possible, while the Clash Blaster's whole thing was how fast it could fire, meaning it would just chew through your tank like nobody's business. Well, they seem to have addressed this by making it so the Clash Blaster has a bigger blast when firing. This makes it so its shots will cover more turf and create a more consistent path when, shooting. And then they reduced its ink consumption by 20%. Now, I can tell you that's not really too much because I've already seen how many shots a Clash Blaster can get from a full tank, and it's not that big of a change. 20% may seem like a decent amount, but it's 20% of a low value, so it's not really going to be that good. 20% of a low value is still a low number, so it's not that good, but I like the fact that the blast is going to be a bit bigger, and it makes it so its turfing ability is more consistent. Currently, as it stands, you would have to fire twice to be able to create a straight line to swim through, and that's one of the more annoying things, is you'd have to stop to fire twice before you can even swim away from the opponent. But thankfully, now that's fixed. The carbon roller had its ink consumption reduced by 25% when flicking. This doesn't count for rolling, but if you do a normal flick or a vertical flick, it's going to consume less ink than it did before. I haven't really seen any complaints about the ink consumption on the carbon, so I don't quite know what this is all about. So I'm not sure if this is. I mean, it's okay if you're going to be standing still flicking a lot, but for most carbons I've seen, they're not going to be standing still and running out of ink all the time. So I don't really think this is too drastic of a change, but, I guess whatever. Then the normal splat roller also has its ink consumption reduced by 10% when flicking. Then here's an interesting one. The Dynamo has been given 14% more effective range from a normal flick. Now, if you don't know what that means, it essentially means how much range it has where it can actually kill people. In this game, it got basically a nerf again with its effective range. Now, the tri-slosher's actual hitbox was bigger than the Dynamo's effective range, and that made it so it's like, why bother playing the Dynamo when the tri-slosher has a better kit and can kill in 2 hits at the same range? Well, now they've increased the Dynamo's effective range, which, if I'm to be correct, this will make it actually, it'll have longer range than the tri-slosher, essentially. So the Dynamos at their effective range can now actually outrange tri-sloshers. And that's pretty good, and I'm glad that they're actually giving Dynamo something instead of just nerfing them again. And here's a change to the chargers. Both the Splat Charger, Splatter Scope, E-liter, and E-liter Scope now charge faster than before. They charge only 4 frames faster, but that actually puts them back at how they charged in the first game. So if you're used to the charge time of the Splatter Scope or the E-liter in Splatoon 1, and you didn't like how they slowed it down in this game, well, now they've reverted it back to the same charge time. They also sped up the charge time for the Goo Tuber by about 5 frames. Once again, doesn't sound like a lot, but with this weapon currently having to go against Squiffer in terms of same, I guess, role, giving it the ability to charge faster was a much needed change. And another adjustment it received is now firing from a charge will actually come out 5 frames faster than it did before, allowing it to shoot a bit faster than before. Now, as I mentioned before, there was another class of weapons in this game that had their mobility changed drastically, and that was the Splatlings. The whole purpose of Splatlings in the first game was to have high mobility so they could outmaneuver shooters, and it was very obvious with the mini Splatlings. Their mobility in the first game was so that they could rival other shooters. However, when it came to this game, they changed the base mobility drastically to the point where now, even with a bunch of run speed, you aren't going to outstrafe pretty much anything. Well, now they've given it a 20% more movement speed while charging, but unfortunately only 3% more mobility while firing. I don't think this will put it anywhere near how it functioned in Splatoon 1, but here's holding out hope that eventually they do something about it, because essentially having a bunch of run speed for a weapon that was supposed to be the mobile-based weapon, now not really being mobile, was what kind of irritated me the most about the mini Splatling in this game. The Splat Dualies were given 9% more range. Once again, I don't really use the Dualies, and I don't know exactly how short of a range they do have compared to most shooters. I know it's about on par with Tenatech, so this 9% more range might put it a little bit closer to being able to rival Tenatech in terms of range. And another change it got is its special requirement went from 170 to 190, so now you have to turf a bit more to get your 10 missiles. The same sort of change was made with the Imperi Dualies. It has 9% more range. However, they adjusted its 170 point inkjet to 200 point inkjet. And this may seem like a pretty big step, but actually it turns out a decent amount of people were using the Imperi Dualies just to farm inkjet, as it is one of the lower requirements for the inkjet. So it just kind of makes sense that obviously people are going to play it to build up the fast inkjets, run some special charge, and make it just easier to get something with it as annoying as special as inkjet. So they raised its special requirement up to reflect how easy it is for this weapon to gather its special. Now we're done with the main weapon adjustments, and there's only one special adjustment, and that is the Baller now receives 40% less damage from shooters and Splatlings. when it comes to using a baller, you're going to want to avoid taking damage, because if you take too much, then the baller pops. Well, Splatlings were able to just dunk on a baller instantaneously. Now it seems they're giving people that use this special a bit of a chance to actually survive and get away. So that's pretty decent. I only use one weapon that actually has this special, and I find the special to be fun to just to use. And I've definitely had quite a few times where I've tried to use it and then flank like a Splatling, like a heavy or something, and they turn around and pop it before I can even get close to them. So this will give it a bit better chance of actually approaching weapons like that. Now on to some bug fixes. So they did change an issue where certain sounds wouldn't be playing anymore. I've noticed this recently myself, where after a couple matches, the sound effect for gaining experience on gear would just not play. Like, it'd just be dead silent and I could see the bar going up. So that's going to be fixed. They also adjusted that thermal ink would actually not function correctly on people using the Splatbrella. If you shoot someone with thermal ink on the Splatbrella and they pull up the Brella as their shield, the thermal ink would not let you see them. That has been corrected. They also adjusted the roller and brush on unpaintable surface, making it so now if you bump into someone, you will actually damage them, even if you can't paint the ground. They also adjusted that painting trees on certain maps actually counted towards having turf. So if you went to Turf War right now before the patch drops and you turf a tree on Inkblot or the Reef, it would count as actual turf points, when that was not the intention, and it didn't work like that in the first game either. They also fixed the out of bounds that you could do in Sturgeon's Shipyard. If you're unaware, there was a glitch where you could get underneath the map and into walls on that map, allowing you to, hide, or in some cases camp the Rainmaker in there and making it impossible for the team to get to it, as the getting out of bounds relied on a certain part of the map to turn to be able to get into that spot, and it didn't exactly come up that often during a match. So if you were to get underneath the map and hide the Rainmaker there, it's very unlikely that the other team could get close and attempt to do it themselves. Another thing fixed that you may or may not have noticed yourself: when you have a match where your teammate has disconnected, the match at the end will display that your rank will not be adjusted from this match. There have been quite a few times where players have gotten cracks on their rank bar despite this message popping up. It seems that this has been adjusted, so now you will no longer have your rank affected by a DC on your team. Another big thing fixed is actually a crash in the game. If you go into your league battle in the game and click View Past Records, the software would crash. That has been adjusted, so it'll no longer crash and will probably actually display your rankings now. Salmon Run received quite a few changes, however, there's a lot, so I can't really list all of them. It would go on for quite some time. However, if you're interested, there will be a link to everything down below. But for the most important part, it's all the weapon changes from the listed above apply to Salmon Run, and they also added a bunch of extra weapons to the local version. So if you're playing Salmon Run locally, you'll have access to more of the weapons that have come out recently. They've also corrected an error with spectator mode. Before, if you were using spectator mode and you were watching a match, whoever was hosting would automatically be viewed as the winner or loser in the match. Now it's determined by who you're watching. So say the host of the lobby is playing on Alpha, but you're watching Bravo, and Bravo loses, it would show that they won. Well, not exactly that they won, but it would show the result screens for Alpha winning, even though you were not watching Alpha. Now it'll reflect who you were watching when the time ended or the match had concluded. And finally, to end this all off, they announced a new map. They showed off the ship map that we saw from one of the directs way back when, and it is called the Manta Maria, which is actually a play on a historical ship called the Santa Maria, which I thought was pretty interesting. I like the kind of callbacks to stuff like that. Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Europe sure like coming up with jokes like this or referencing real life things. And then another map added to Salmon Run called the Lost Outpost. And from the looks of these maps, I like the ship map. This is something I really wanted. I've waited for a new map. It's been about a month. We haven't even seen one, so I'm excited for this. And the Lost Outpost seems like a really interesting map. There's actually like a house in the middle of it that you can hide in. I'm curious if you can actually paint the walls and climb up it. probably have seen, I think by the time this is coming out, there's already some footage of the map, and that's probably already been answered, but I have yet to see any of it. But I'm excited for the new map and the new Salmon Run map. Both the Salmon Run map is actually being added to the local version of Salmon Run tonight when the update drops. So if you have people around you to play, you can go ahead and play it now. Or if you're like me and don't live near people that have a Switch, you have to wait for this map to be added to the Salmon Run rotations at some point. This patch does drop later tonight, and in the same announcement, they did show off the new Bubble Blower special and how it actually functions, so we actually got to see more in-game footage of the special. And there was confirmation that you can only throw 3 bubbles out of the blower, and then your team must pop them to break all of them. So I say I summon all 3 bubbles, I guess, and then my teammate shoots the first one and pops it, it'll pop all 3. And at the same time, the enemy team can pop the bubbles to make them shrivel up and break. So, and you can contribute to the popping. This was a question I had when I talked to some people, is if you can actually pop the bubbles. Because from the footage, when we originally saw the special, it was not the person who used the bubble blower that popped the bubbles to create the ink. But they did show off that you can, in fact, pop the bubbles yourself. So that's pretty cool. So that's it. That's all of the stuff included for Splatoon 2 version 1.2. If you're interested in reading all these patch notes yourself, the link to it will be down in the description. However, I want to warn everyone that at the time of recording this, the only version of the patch notes we have are in Japanese. So unless you want to use Google Translate or you can read Japanese, you can go ahead and click the link and take a look yourself. But like I said, at the time of recording this, there is no English version of the patch notes up on anywhere of Nintendo America's site or Nintendo Europe. So it's not available in English, it is only available in Japanese. But I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you all later.